Hello everyone, welcome to this video on AWS WAF, that is Amazon Web Services Web Application Firewall. In today's video, we will explore the key features and the benefit of AWS WAF and how it can help you protect your web applications from various security threats. So let's get started. So in this video, we first going to talk about what is Web Application Firewall in general, that is WAF. Then I'll talk about what is AWS WAF and its features. Then we'll talk about components of AWS Web so that you can have a better understanding how does it work behind the scenes. We'll talk about evaluation order of rules in the rule group. We'll talk about their actions whether terminating or the non-terminating actions. We'll talk about how the pricing gets impacted with the help of Web ACL capacity units, very important to understand. Then I'll walk you through the use case architecture which we're going to use for our demo today. And then to sum it up all, we'll talk about important points which you can remember. So basically, what and why you need a web application firewall. So web application firewall is a software, or it can be an appliance, or it can be a device, it can be a service which filters, monitors and blocks your HTTP traffic to and from your web application or a web service. Your WAF will protect your web applications from common attacks such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, DDoS, and the bot attack. Basically, it will help you to reduce the attack surface in your application security ecosystem. It can help you to protect your application vulnerabilities, which can be of any layer into libraries of your application layer itself, your middleware, or your maybe not updated or upgraded operating system, or into the data. It can also help in zero-day attacks, basically which refers to exploits which targets vulnerabilities that are unknown to the software vendor at that point of time. WAF can provide an additional layer of defense by detecting and mitigating such attacks as well, even before your software vendor is able to roll out patches or updates for those kind of vulnerabilities. It can also help you to protect against denial of service or DDoS attack, that is distributed denial of service, which basically can overwhelm your web applications with enormous amount of traffic, rendering it inaccessible to legitimate users. A web application firewall can help mitigate these DDoS attacks by filtering and blocking malicious traffic, ensuring availability and performance of your application. It can also give you protection against bot attacks, and these bot attacks can be used for malicious purposes such as scraping sensitive data, launching brute force attacks, or carrying out automated attacks. A web application firewall can identify and block these kind of bad bots, allowing only legitimate traffic to access your application. Now let's come to the AWS WAF or Web Application Firewall. So basically what AWS WAF is, it's again a web application firewall service that helps to protect your web applications from those exploits which we spoke earlier. Now the key features, if you look at it, it has got multi-layered security controls which will help you to protect against different type of attacks. You can protect attacks based on the IP addresses, based on the rate of the request, based on the content of the request, and you can also protect your web applications against the bot attacks or the bad bot attacks. It does not have any operational overhead. It is a fully managed service which is ready to use with the help of built-in rule groups which are AWS or third-party managed. You can also have these default security controls, or as well as you can have those customized security as well, where your customer can customize the available rules. They can create their own rules and the rule groups. There is no need to change your application code or for your WAF to work along with your application or your web application services. Now, how your AWS WAF can protect your workload. So if your web application workload is on AWS, your WAF can be integrated with application load balancer, your API gateways, your AppSync, your Cognito, your AWS verified access, as well as AWS app runner, And if you have got your application on-premise, it can be integrated with the help of Amazon CloudFront. And the CloudFront is a service which can help to protect resources on-prem as well as on AWS workloads. So this is how AWS WAF gives you a comprehensive set of security controls. Now, what are the components which help your AWS WAF to work behind the scenes, right? So once you configure your AWS WAF, the first component you need to create is Web ACL or Web Access Control List. Once you create a Web ACL, then you need to define its protection strategy by adding something called rules. Rules would have a statement or condition which will define the inspection criteria, and there will be an action defined which would be taken if a web request matches the condition or the criteria in the statement. You can configure to block or allow the matching request or count them, or you can also throw a captcha or a challenge before the request is allowed or blocked. Now this web ACL can contain these individual rules, or these rules can be clubbed into a set of reusable rules called rule groups, where these rules work together as a group. Now these rule groups can be AWS managed or third-party sellers such as Palo Alto, Fortinet. You can find those rule groups managed by these third-party vendors in AWS Marketplace, and you can also define your own rule groups as well. Now there's very one important thing, that Web ACL and the rule groups are WAF resources, but your rules are not WAF resources. They only exist in context of Web ACL or the rule groups. They work in these two entities. They do not have anything as an individual statement. Now let's talk about the processing order of rules and the rule groups in Web ACL. When you start using AWS WAF and any traffic reaches to WAF, so evaluation happens in Web ACL or the rule groups against the web request. It checks the rule, or it gives the priority to the lowest numeric setting which is put up on the rule, and it keeps on doing the same until it either finds a match that terminates the evaluation or your all rules are exhausted. So let's take an example. Let's we have following rules and the rule groups in a Web ACL, and we have these priority numbers as given on the right hand side. Let's see how your evaluation of the rules will be happen based on the priority. So your WAF would evaluate the rules for this Web ACL in the following order. First of all, the rule 1, which has got a priority 0, will be evaluated. If a match is found, there will be no further evaluation. And if there is no match found, the next rule would be evaluated, which would belong to rule group A, and rule A1 and A2 would be evaluated against. Let's say there is no match found still, and the next evaluation will happen against rule 2 because it has got priority 200. And if the match found, the evaluation stops, else it will move to the further rules, and in this scenario it would be rule group B's rule B1 and then rule B2 based on their priority. So you can see the first priority is given to priority 0, and the next evaluation priority was given to priority 100, and so on. So this is how the rule evaluation will work. Now, as we spoke about earlier, your rule will have a condition and an action. Now these action can be a terminating action or non-terminating action. In case of it is a terminating action, that will stop the Web ACL evaluation of the request and either lets it to continue to your protection application or blocks it, right? If a rule in Web ACL finds a match for a request and the rule action is allow or block, that match determines the final disposition of the web request for the Web ACL. Your WAF does not process any other rules in the Web ACL that comes after the matching one. When a rule with the count action matches a request, WAF will count the request and then continues processing the rules that follow in the Web ACL rule set. Your captcha and challenge can be non-terminating or terminating actions. So AWS WAF will check its token status. If the request has a valid token, WAF treats the match similar to a count match and then continue processing the rules that will follow in the Web ACL. If the request does not have a valid token, your WAF terminates the evaluation and sends the client a captcha puzzle or a silent background client session challenge to solve it. If the rule evaluation does not result in any terminating action, then AWS WAF applies the Web ACL default action to the request. Now talk about the Web ACL capacity units, which are used to calculate and control the operating resources which you require to run the rules or rule groups in the Web ACLs. Now first of all, you will have rule WCs or Web ACL capacity units to reflect each rule's relative cost. Then you have rule group WCs, that is basically will be determined by the number of rules and their relative cost, which are defined in that rule group, and the maximum capacity goes up to 5000 WCs. Your Web ACL WCs, which is determined by the rule and the rule groups inside the Web ACL, and the basic price of your Web ACL allows you to use 1500 WCs, and the maximum capacity goes to 5000 WCs, or the web capacity units. This is a soft limit which can be increased with the help of AWS support if needed to be. This is going to be our architecture for demo use case, which I'm going to configure step by step so that you can easily follow along. Now if you see, we have three EC2 instances which is named as image, register and card, and they have been configured in three different availability zones, and they are being front-ended by an application load balancer. On the application load balancer, we have configured path-based routing, where your application load balancer will have a look at the path or the URI, and if contains a specific value, like if it contains images, it would be routed to the images EC2 or the target group which is configured in the backend of application load balancer, and similarly for the register and the cart URI path as well. Now in this scenario or the demo use case, we are going to try out two different scenarios where we will use terminating as well as the non-terminating rule actions. Also we'll see IP set rule and the string match rule, which is basically we'll try to see how you configure these two different type of rules on web application firewall. And just to let you know that I have kept this architecture ready to save some of the time. So what we have already done, we have created these three EC2 instances along with the application load balancer, and it's already working. Now as a next step, we would go and configure the AWS Web Application Firewall. Now some of you who have not watched our previous video of configuring these scenario, then you can please watch that video first, so that you can see how actually we can configure these instances as well as the application load balancer, and then we can start from there. So let's go and jump into the management console. So guys, here we are. I just wanted to show you that our load balancer and the EC2 instances are ready. So these are the three EC2 instances which I have already configured for this demonstration. One is card server, registration server, and the image server, and they are front end with the help of an application load balancer, which is WAF LB01. And let's try that how it's currently working without the web application firewall. So if I just, you can copy the DNS name of my application load balancer, put it in the URL, add that URI path. So as I said, this is path based routing which we have configured. So if we go and register, it should take me to the registration server, and if I go and put image here, it should take me to the image server, right? And if we go and do the card thing, so it will take me to the card server. So this is how we have set it up, and it's working perfectly fine. So let's close it out. Now once you look at the load balancer, there are two ways where you can integrate web application firewall along with the load balancer. So you click on integrated services, and if you see here, you will find the options to include or integrate these services. So we have config, global accelerator, as well as the AWS WAF. So we can start from here. Either you can click on create web ACL, and this will start creating web ACL, and that web ACL would be integrated with this web application firewall. This is the one way of doing it. Another way of, you can just, let me open up another link. So if I go here in the management console, I'll type web application firewall, or WAF in short, and this will come up. You click on that one and it will open up the WAF management console, or the GUI. So from here also you can create web ACL and you can start configuring things. So if you here, you can click on create web ACL from here, or you can do it from here. So to start with, as we discussed earlier, the first component would be the web ACL. So click on create web ACL. Now here you need to define the name. You can say first web ACL. One thing you need to understand here, that this name and the cloud watch metric name, you won't be able to change later or edit later. So give it a thought before you finalize these names. You can put a description here. You can say uh, web ACL for my application load balancer. Right now, when you start creating this WAF, you will have an option to create two different type of resources. One which can be used with Amazon CloudFront distributions, another one which can be used with the regional resources. So when you take it up for the Amazon CloudFront distribution, your region would be global, and by global what we mean, it will be US East Northern Virginia by default. So if you see, you cannot pick your region from here, right? So it has been grayed out for us. So if you want to create a resource or the web ACL resource for regional resources, then you can pick your region from here. So let's say again, I can say the first web ACL. I'm gonna use this one, web ACL for ALB. I'm gonna create a regional resource. Another thing which you need to remember, that to use WAF along with your regional resources, your resource and this web ACL should be created in the same region. So in our case, this is Asia Pacific Singapore. So I'm gonna pick that one, right? Problem. Now here, another opportunity you get to add your AWS resources which are in the specific region, but you can do this later as well. So I'm gonna skip it here and I'll show you how you can do it once you are done configuring your web ACL. Click on next. Now comes the second component of your web application firewall, that is rule, right? So rules, basically, if you click on here, you will get two different options. Either you can have managed rule groups, or you can add your own rules as well as the rule groups, right? So in the managed, let's first talk about the managed rule groups. So if you click on managed rule groups, you will see the rule groups which are managed either by AWS or the third party sellers or the providers such as F5, Fortinet, etc. And you can use these ready to use out of the box kind of a rule groups. This is a one number of rules which are put together. This is what the rule group definition is. So if you click on AWS managed rule groups, here also you will have an option to either have paid rule groups, or you can have free rule groups. In the paid rule groups, you'll find bot control, account takeover prevention, account creation fraud prevention, and you can also see the kind of a capacity or the WC they are going to use, as well as their additional fee. Now to use any of these rule groups, you just need to toggle this switch, right? And then you need to add it to provide the required configuration. So these are the basically the paid ones. If you go to the free rule groups, let's say you want to have anonymous IP list or the known bad impacts, all these things, I mean, you can pick with whatever. Let's say we will want to start with Amazon IP reputation list, which is basically contains rules which is based on the threat intelligence of Amazon. And if you want to block source which are associated with bots or other threats or well-known maligned IPs, so you can use this one. So if you click on this, you can edit the managed rules here to change their collective rule group action or their all rule action, because based on managed rule groups will not allow you to change the rule definition or the rule configuration criteria, but there are certain aspect of which you can change. Click on edit. So it will allow you to basically let you know what kind of a rule it is, what it contains, what is the capacity, what is its scope of inspection, whether you want to inspect all web requests or you can only inspect request that matches scope down statement. If you want to have scope down statement, you can do that, right? or here it is the list rules. You can choose if you want to override rule actions. So you can see override to allow, to block, or to count. Otherwise the default action would be the block, right? And here you can have the action for managed IP reputation list, managed reconnaissance list, and managed IP DDoS list. You can also override these specific individual actions as well. Now if you want, you can override the rule group action. If you can say I want to overrule the whole rule group action, you can just click this box and override the rule group action, which to count. So if you want, just count whatever these requests are coming from these different IPs, or the reputation or the IPs which is listed under this reputation list, we can do that, right? So that's it. From this one you can save the rule and it will take it from there. But now let's talk about the customized rules, or as we spoke about that your WAF has default as well as the customized rules. So this was for the default ones. Now let's go to the customized one. So let's say you want to create your own rules, right? So cancel here, click on add rules, and now you want to create your own rules, add my own rules and the rule group. So you can click on here. Once you go the next step, you will see that three different type of rule type which you can define. That is, one is IP set, rule builder, and the rule group. So by default it will pick rule builder, where you can create individual rules of your own. We will talk about this IP set later, and here this is where you can create your own rule groups, as we saw for the managed rule groups on the previous step. When you click rule builder, so basically you can create rules, and the rule builder will give you two different options. One, you can have a visual editor, or you can have a JSON editor. Now the JSON editor is very helpful when you have your own existing rules and you want to copy paste them as a kind of a JSON statement. So if you want to do that, this is very easy for you to customize those existing rules. Click on here, put your statement here and validate it, right? So let's go with it. For this demonstration purpose, we're going to use a rule visual editor, where you can give the name of your rule. Let's say I want to call it rule to count. I want to just count the rules, count the request. So this is the first non-terminating rule which I'm going to use. Now you'll have two different types of rule as well. Either you can have a regular rule, the one which we are currently configuring, or you can have a rate based rule. Now the rate based rule will limit the number of requests which is allowed in a 5-minute period, and the request which matches your criteria, the request count will continuously evaluate it. A rule only gets applied when it only applies its action when the request limit is reached, and as soon as the limit is as soon as the request is below the limit, it will stop or remove the action which you specify. So basically this kind of a rule would be a good fit for a DDoS kind of a situation. Now I want to create a regular rule where I want to have match the statement. I want to match the statement, let's say. So let's say if the statement is a match, right, check an inspection option from here. So this request, if it is originating from a country, originating from a specific IP address, or has a label, or it have the component which is single header, all header, quick, all these things. So these are the different options which you can pick for the inspection criteria. I'm going to pick URI path because we have already specified path based routing for our application load balancer. Now I want to match a type where this URI contains a string. Let's say this one, right? And string to match is, let's say I want to call it card, right? So I want to see how many requests are coming. I want to count them, which is hitting my card server, right? So I want to, now once you done your statement or the condition, then you would like to put your action, as the rule will contain a condition as well as an action. So action you can define from out of these 5 actions, allow, block and all. So I'm going to count this action and just keep it that way, right? So I'm going to add this rule, right? So this is my rule. It is gonna, and once the rule is ready, it tells you how much capacity is gonna take from the WC. It's gonna use 10 WCs from those 5000 limit, right? Then this is the action for it. Again, if you see, now I'm doing a count action, right? So this is the action which is based on my evaluation of my rule. What happens if the web request does not match this criteria? Then the default web ACL action will come into the picture, and which either can be allow or block. In this case, I'm putting a block, and if you put a block action, you can have an option to have a custom response, and I'm gonna come back about this later, but just be there. You can put a custom response. Let's say we can want to enable the custom response. I want to put a kind of a 404 kind of a response code to it, and I want how you like to put the response body. Either you can have create a custom response body. I want to have a plain text and response, but I want to call, okay, this is the message from my WAF, please stop this, right? Save it. So I have saved this thing, right? And we'll talk about the domain list as well when we speak about the captcha part of it. Click on next. Now it shows me rule to count the capacity and the action. Click on next. Here you can set CloudWatch metrics. We did it for the Web ACL earlier. This is for my specific or the individual rule, right? We also enable the sample request. Basically, if you disable the sampling, you will not be able to view requests that match your Web ACL rule. So I want to see whether I want to sample all those requests. I'm enabling it here. Click on next, right? And once review all those options which you have put up, and just click on create your web ACL. So this is my first web ACL has been created, right? Now it will still not work because what we have done, we have not created or we have not integrated this web ACL with any of our AWS resources. You can see it is blank here, and we're going to do it in a couple of minutes just now, or let's do it first and then we'll come back on the other options. Let's quickly do that. Click on add AWS resources, and the AWS resources which I'm going to add is application load balancer, and this is already showing my WAF ALB01. I'm going to add to this web ACL now. So this will integrate this web ACL or AWS WAF to my existing application load balancer. So that's how you add the resources. Now we were talking about IP sets earlier, so let's quickly do that as well. Click on IP set, right? So here it shows one of IP set. Let's quickly create a new one. I want to show how you can use rule types, IP set rule types. So first for that you need to create an IP set. I'm going my own IP2. This is the place where you can define your IP addresses list, and based on this criteria you can set up an IP set rule, and your web ACL can use that rule and these conditions to see whether your web request has to be allowed, denied, or what kind of an action has to be taken on that. So I'm saying my IP region is the same. I'm going to put that IP here. So let's say this is my current public, it's fine. Click on create IP set, and this my IP set has been created. So my own IP2, right? Now let's go back to the web ACL and see whether this first web ACL is working or not. If you go, then we'll see the rule again. So once you open the web ACL, here you will see that request per 5-minute period, and based on that this will be a place where your sample request would be captured, right? And here you can check your rules. Currently this is my rule, right? And these are two different rules which has been added for account takeover prevention and the account creation and fraud prevention. You can just add those managed rules to your ACL by clicking it there, which I showed you earlier as well, right? Now here we put up a rule where we are looking a match in our URI path. Let's see whether this rule is working or not, right? So we need to go here, get the DNS name of my load balancer. I'm going to copy it from here, put it here, say cart, and see, if you see, this is basically throwing a message that this is a message from my WAF, please stop this. So guys, you saw that the rule was set for the counting and the default action was set on the block, and it was sending a custom response to my web request. So this is how it is. So our first rule is working perfectly fine. And now if you go back to the web ACL overview, you can see the rule to count counted request, all counted request, and the first web ACL block. So you can see from here. So if you just, so here you can see that it will start showing you how many requests have been counted, how many requests have been blocked. So this is basically kind of a visual representation of what we see over there. You can add this dashboard to your dashboard as well. Now as you remember, we enabled sample request. So this is where your sample request comes into handy, where it can capture what all the requests approved, not approved, block, what was action was taken. So from here you can check that one. Now we created this IP set. Let's quickly create another rule which would basically on the IP set, right? So go to the web ACL. This is my web ACL. Go to the rules and add a rule here. So I'm going to add one more rule. Now this time I'm going to add a rule which is based on IP set. Click on IP set. It'll ask you to give it a name. I want to say IP based rule, right? Pick your IP set. This is my IP set which I'm going to use. You can either use source IP address or IP address in header. Here you need to understand, if your request is coming through a CDN or maybe some kind of a proxy, the source IP basically which address which identifies the proxy, and the original IP address is only sent in a header. So basically you need to use caution with this option, with the option IP address and header, because headers can be handled in a different way by proxies and they can be modified to bypass the inspection. Again, here you need to see whether you want to put an allow, block, or count or capture. And for this specific IP set rule, I want to set up a captcha that if I'm trying to access my servers, I should be thrown with a captcha challenge, right? Now you will see there is something called immunity challenge. Basically, when you complete the captcha, a captcha token is generated and it is assigned with the web request, and it stays alive for these many seconds. If you want to change this thing, you can just reduce it. So let's say I want to put it at maybe 65 seconds, right? It should be more than 60. And if you want, you can add a custom request. You can add a custom header to this specific request or this specific rule as well. So what I have done, I've taken my IP, I have put a captcha rule to this one. I'm adding this rule now. Once I click on add rule, right? Click on add rule. So now you can see it will asking me to set the rule priority. So if you see this rule gonna use capacity 10, this is gonna use 1, and this is the one which is going to evaluate first, and this is gonna come second, right? And if nothing works out, then the block will happen. That's the default rule. So I want to put this on the priority 1. So I want to be thrown that captcha, and then the rule then the WAF should count the request, and then whatever happens, if nothing matches, then it goes to the default action of Web ACL. So here you can change the priority of your evaluation of your Web ACL rule. So I'm going to click on save this, right? So now let's click again, and I'm going to take this one, gonna Control X, close this one, open up another window. Let's see what happens now. Right, so this is basically now it's throwing me a captcha because I have put up a rule that if this traffic is coming from my IP, I should be presented with a captcha challenge before I can move further. You can see it's a success, and then it will be, and now the other rule getting into the picture, that is my default Web ACL rule. So this is how your AWS Web Application Firewall works, guys. Web ACL's console. So if you see, you can see those metrics here. If it starts showing all blocked request, first ACL blocked request. So all these things you can find from here, from this visual dashboard here, right? So you can add it to a dashboard. You can get these metrics for 1 hour, 3 hour, 12 hour, 1 day, 3 day kind of a thing. I mean, you can tune it based on your needs and requirement. Here, this is the sample request which we talked about earlier. So it starts showing you what is the metric which is capturing this request, what is the source IP, what is the URI path which is being used. And if you go here, so you can see more of such requested, like what are the URI path and what was the action taken and what is the timestamp on it. So all these sample requests will be able to help you to further tune and use your WAF. There's one more thing which I would like to talk about, and we can talk about it during the when we go back to our slide, and we'll talk about the important points to remember. So this is all about the web application firewall demo, guys. One thing you need to remember, if you delete the web ACL, your rules will also get deleted with it, but for the rule groups, it's just a reference which gets removed from it. That's what you need to remember, guys. So let's go back to our PPT and talk about some important points which would be useful for your interviews as well as for your examination point. So let's quickly go through the points which we need to remember, which I believe is quite important. So the first one, and it's very important, before you do any changes on your web application, and if this web application is serving your production traffic, test and tune them in a staging or testing environment. And once you are okay or comfortable that your rules are having the desired impact on your traffic, then only go ahead and apply those things in your production traffic. You should test and tune your updated rules first in the count mode with your production traffic before you enable them for any terminating actions. Your WAF or AWS Web Application Firewall protect web applications from common vulnerabilities and attacks, and it can be used for SQL injections, your cross-site scripting, your DDoS attacks and the bot attacks, your account creation, fraud preventions, all those things which which we saw during our group of managed rules. You can use it for anonymous IP or the proxy attacks kind of a thing, right? So the bad IPs, the known bad IPs, all those things you can use your web application firewall to protect your web applications. If you use more than 1500 web capacity units in your web ACL, then it's gonna cost you beyond the basic web ACL price. You need to remember that. You cannot change your web ACL name once it gets created. The CloudWatch metric name cannot be changed, as we discussed, right? And you would be charged additional fee if you use captcha or challenge rule action in one of your rules, or as a rule action override in the rule group. So this is something which you need to be aware of. We know that rule actions can be terminating or non-terminating. Terminating actions are allow and block, and your non-terminating action is count, and your captcha and challenge can be terminating or non-terminating as well. Your default action is the action which you define for your AWS WAF, which it takes on a request when the rules in the web ACL do not explicitly allow or block it. So if your rules and the rule groups are not allowing or blocking a request, then the default action would be something which is going to do this. Your single web ACL can only be associated with one or more AWS resources, but each AWS resource can only have one web ACL associated at any given point of time. So this is basically a one-to-many relationship. So your web ACL can be used with multiple AWS resources and the same web ACL, but your AWS resource cannot have more than one web ACL at any given point of time. You cannot associate a web ACL that you have associated with the CloudFront distribution with any other resource type. As we saw that while creating the web ACL, it clearly asks for you whether you want to make this web ACL for CloudFront kind of a distribution or for other regional resources like application load balancer, API gateways, your AWS cognitive user